Welcome back to The Explainer. So what actually happens to your moral worth when you lose everything that society values? In our previous explainers, we mapped out where moral reasoning begins, and we explored this concept of the human floor as a vital moral checkpoint before systems can judge us. We talked about how institutions often confuse a local failure, like failing a test, with a total judgment of a person's worth. But today we're going to push that concept to the absolute brink. We're going to see if the human floor can survive what philosophers like to call the ultimate skeptical hammer.
Throughout this explainer, we're really going to challenge your baseline assumptions by dropping that hammer directly on human morality. It's kind of an uncomfortable question, honestly, but it's an absolutely essential one. Think about it. If you lose all your intelligence, your physical strength, your economic usefulness, or even just your ability to return a favor, if you lose literally every single capacity that society values, do you still matter morally? Does your suffering still count?
Section 1. Facing the hammer blow. This right here is the ultimate test of our moral framework.
Okay, so we have to start by confronting the single most devastating argument against the whole concept of inherent human worth. Look, it's super easy to say everyone matters when everyone is, contributing. But we've got to examine this really dangerous gap between the biological reality of a human and the moral decision to actually care about them. The hammer blow strikes right in this space, the space between a description and an obligation. On one side, we have a pure biological fact. This being has human DNA. But on the other side, we have a heavy moral claim. This human belongs within moral consideration. The devastating question the skeptic asks is just why? Why should biological humanity carry any normative weight at all? In other words, why should the mere fact that you have human DNA automatically force me to treat you well? Where exactly is the bridge between those two statements?
Because, let's be real, just because you can physically describe someone as human doesn't magically force a king or a system or anyone really to treat them well. Nature doesn't physically compel the powerful to care about the weak. A strong person can just abandon a weaker human. A government can entirely ignore the people it governs. This is a classic philosophical problem. What is does not, by itself, compel what ought. Just because humans exist, it doesn't somehow logically manufacture this universal obligation to be nice to them.
And this brilliantly illustrates the chronological order of the problem. We arrive as humans way, way before our systems start scoring our abilities. Just think about the sequence of events here. First, a human exists. Second, that human develops a totally random configuration of capacities, intelligence, strength, empathy, whatever. Third, humans get together and construct these incredibly complex systems like economies, schools, and governments. And then finally, step 4, those systems look back and judge the humans based on what the system currently needs. But here's the kicker. We humans didn't acquire our traits just to satisfy labor markets that hadn't even been invented yet.
Section 2. The island before systems. Let's take a look at what happens before all these systems are even built.
I want you to imagine two people stranded together on an island. There are abundant resources, but they know absolutely nothing about economics, formal education, or professional status. None of that exists here. But there is one major difference between them. One person possesses all the skills to build a shelter and forage for food. The other person, well, maybe they only know how to optimize SEO for tech startups, which obviously makes them completely dependent and essentially useless in a jungle environment. So the highly capable human learns quickly, they construct tools, they organize resources super efficiently. The other human has far fewer useful survival capacities, and they'd probably be close to death without some assistance. Now, the capable human could easily help out at a pretty modest cost to themselves.
Now, the stronger person can absolutely say, hey, I am better at building, but they cannot logically leap to, therefore, your death does not matter. The difference in capacity establishes something very real for sure. It dictates that the stronger person should probably be the one to build the shelter and manage the food. It totally justifies a role. But does the weaker human's lack of capacity justify moral indifference? Does it mean their severe suffering just suddenly drops out of the moral equation? Well, no. The answer is no. If you can easily prevent severe harm, the other person's lack of skills isn't some sort of free pass for cruelty.
Which brings us to Section 3, testing the alternatives. If just being human isn't enough, what else could possibly work?
So the skeptic might still push back here and say, okay, but why is humanity the baseline? Why not pick a specific trait to decide who gets moral consideration? Well, let's actually put the most popular alternatives to the test. When we systematically cross off these alternative traits, we see really quickly how they fall apart as admission tickets to basic moral standing. I mean, they are excellent for deciding things like jobs or duties, but they are terrible as a baseline. Take rationality, for instance. It's great for assigning responsibility, but if you make it the baseline for moral worth, then infants or severely cognitively impaired humans wouldn't even count. What about usefulness? A brilliant mathematician is completely useless if your goal is fixing a broken engine. Usefulness depends entirely on the system's current purpose. What about reciprocity? A newborn baby or a dying person can literally never repay you. And power? Well, if power determines moral worth, then morality just completely collapses into a simple description of who happens to be the strongest.
Section 4, the King's Trapdoor. Let's pit raw power versus morality and see exactly where the logic breaks down. Imagine a king who controls a trapdoor. He has wealth, he has intelligence, he has immense power. But here's the thing, none of those facts inherently justify pulling the lever on the person standing below. The king can accurately say, I am stronger, or I won the political contest, or I am more intelligent. The human floor doesn't deny any of those facts at all. It doesn't even deny that the king has the physical ability to open the trapdoor. But the moment the king adds, therefore your suffering doesn't matter, a massive, totally absurd logical leap has just occurred.
The crucial point to take away here is that winning a system requires you to prove your superiority for that specific game, right? But it does not automatically downgrade the loser's underlying humanity. The burden of proof entirely shifts back to the king. The score explains the victory. It explains exactly why he wears the crown and gets to sit on the fancy throne. But it does not magically act as a bridge to moral irrelevance for the person who lost.
Section 5. Membership, Standing, and Weight. Now that we've survived the hammer blow, let's define what actually happens above the floor.
We've seen that stripping away a person's capacities doesn't strip away their right to basic moral consideration, and we've seen that winning a system doesn't grant you the right to ignore the humanity of the losers. So now we can confidently define the solution. Philosophers call this prima facie inclusion, which basically means, at first glance, or by default, your basic interests enter moral consideration simply because you are human. This is a modest but absolutely bulletproof commitment. You don't need to pass some secondary test. You do not need to prove you're highly rational, incredibly useful, or holding a position of power just to get your foot in the door of moral reasoning. Membership is granted simply by existing as a human being.
Now, don't get me wrong, we can absolutely treat people differently based on merit, wrongdoing, or scarcity above the floor, as long as we don't revoke their membership to humanity in the process. This is where the framework really shines, honestly. The human floor isn't demanding perfectly equal outcomes for everyone in every situation. It draws a clear line between membership and weight. Membership, that just gets you on the floor. But weight, how we balance competing claims, that all happens above the floor. If you commit a violent crime, you might face restraint or punishment. If you're a better athlete, you get the scarce spot on the team. Those are judgments of weight and suitability, but neither of those things revokes the basic membership of the human involved.
The beautiful thing is, we don't have to pretend everyone is totally equal in ability to recognize that no one has to earn their right to exist in the moral field. What happens above the floor might depend heavily on your intelligence, your discipline, or, frankly, even your luck within a particular system. But your baseline entry into moral consideration, that is yours, right from the very beginning. You don't earn the human floor by winning a human game. You arrive on it simply by arriving as human.
So, as you navigate the various hierarchies in your own life today, I want you to ask yourself if the systems you uphold are confusing a local failure with a total loss of human worth. We live in a world that is obsessed with metrics, scores, and rankings. The next time you see someone lose a human game, whether they fail a test, lose a job, or simply lack the capacities that society currently prizes, look really closely at how they are treated. Are we just acknowledging a difference in capacity, or are we silently opening the king's trapdoor? Keep that question in mind going forward, and never let the abstractions we create make the human being disappear.